I'm Daniel Bishop. I'm going to be talking to you about attribute rules. If you all have looked at the schedule, we have approximately 30 minutes for this. So we're going to stay in the kiddie pool. We're not going to be able to dive too deep into this. My main goal here is to kind of just make you aware of attribute rules, their power, and give you some ideas of common ways that we see attribute rules being used, especially from my perspective, data integrity, NG911, all of that stuff. So I'm Daniel Bishop. We'll skip over that. I work for Cloudpoint Geospatial. We are a consulting firm that works in a bunch of different geographic areas. My wheelhouse is in the public safety area, so I'm just going to breeze through those. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about, we're going to talk about attribute rules. What are they? They're different categories and use cases. We'll dig into some of the common rules that we use with almost every project that I'm involved with, and discuss validation and domains, which are used by attribute rules but are kind of their own bucket. So we'll focus mainly upon calculation rules rather than in, some of the other categories, but we'll kind of try to brush over everything to give you guys a well-rounded understanding of this. And then for my next feat, I'm going to attempt a live demo. We'll see how that goes. That's always, presenting live is always fun. And then I'll open it up to Q&A. Okay, so what are attribute rules? There are three types, main types. We have calculation, we have validation rules, and then we have constraint rules. Like I said before, we're going to focus on calculation rules. This is generally the area that most people kind of click into and say, oh, that would be that's what I'm looking for. All of these are automations that are easily built and configured within your Arc Pro environment. So if you're still on desktop, this is one of those limitations where if you switch over to Arc Pro, the transition can be a little rocky, I understand, but it's worth it. If you have Arc Pro, you more than likely, depending upon some of the devil's in the details, if you have enterprise and depending upon your user type, you more than likely have some capability of writing some attribute rules. Calculation, let's walk through this. These are used for auto populations of fields, whether it's on insert or updating. They run automatically, or you can run them kind of in a batch. So essentially you're not auto-populating, you're going to wait, and then if you have a bunch of changes to make, you can batch those changes. Really useful for field propagation. That's one of the main things that I'm dealing with, and I don't want to rush ahead too far. So validation rules, these are, you can think about this as data integrity, so more like QA, QC. It will tell you if you write the rule, you could have it say, oh, this address point is actually on the odd side of the road, even though it's an even address point, and it would flag as an error. So you can peruse through your entire data set to see where those instances might occur, so you're aware of those things. And it essentially just kind of helps with your data editors if you need to periodically check to see that your data is, doesn't have any of those critical errors that might get you in trouble. Constraint rules, these exist. I'm going to spend very little time on this because these are the things that frustrate editors more than anything. It essentially just prevents you from putting something into a field. So if you have a 0 for an address number, you could set a constraint rule that wouldn't allow that. The triggers are also important for attribute rules. So triggering events tell the rule how you want it to perform. Insert and update are the most popular. So if you're adding a new address point, if you have attribute rules that are firing upon insert, then it would auto-populate. You can also do delete, which kind of, it's not as commonly used, but if, say, you have multiple units within a structure and you have a field that counts how many units are within that structure, if you remove a unit, it would auto change that total field or total unit number field. All right. Okay, so this is my world. This slide is not AI-ified, so it's pretty boring, and that's kind of how it feels sometimes. I'm staring at two different schemas that represent the same data. Essentially, these are just a selection from an attribute field column. So we have the field names and their aliases for a local/CAD schema, what the computer-aided dispatch software was configured in. And then on the right, we have the state-mandated, technically federally mandated NG911 schema. Having those two requirements is a common pain point for a lot of the people I work with. So if we have a data editor, if they can change their workflow as minimally as possible, and we're able to kind of auto-populate those required fields, or vice versa, it will help kind of your data editor kind of get into a more future-looking workflow if they're starting to edit NG911 fields, and then we can calculate those legacy fields as needed. It kind of moves your organization into starting to edit the new schema and get used and comfortable with that, while also maintaining the required fields of your existing software. So this is kind of how it works. We have editor fields, then we have our attribute rule, and then it propagates into the legacy or derived fields. Field propagation is the most common when we have legacy predirections, legacy types. When NG911 wants those directionals to be spelled out, southwest, spelled southwest, and you're used to typing in, SW, having to type in multiple fields every time you add an address point or a road center line, that is just a recipe for common editor error. We all have thick fingers from time to time. I'm certainly susceptible to typos. So as far as getting people from typing in the exact same information over and over again, that's what we're trying to move away from. So the field propagation is an example here is we have our NG911 street pre-directional field, and that would automatically populate into your legacy street directional field. We also have spatial lookups. So if you are adding a new address point, it would find where that address point is within a certain polygon. If you have an authoritative incorporated municipality, it would automatically populate with that. So you can do spatial lookups. You can do derived concatenations. Those are very useful for those full name fields whenever you have to concatenate something for a label, essentially. If you can have that already figured out and populated every time you make a change, that's really helpful and saves time. And then lastly, coordinate stamping. This is currently the most limited, but very, very helpful. Currently you can have a attribute rule that populates the latitude and longitude of an address point. The big asterisk there is that it's running off of the coordinate system of the underlying database. So if you're not using WGS84, you're kind of out of luck at the moment. I know that there's rumblings, and maybe sometime in the future they'll have an embedded recalculation. That's just a lot of mathematics to throw into an attribute rule. But for the time being, if you're using WGS84, you don't have to worry about doing a calculation on the latitude and longitude. Okay, so we're going to break down road center lines and address points. These are the main data sets that I work with. So here are just a few examples of the common rules that we would see, and I'll show you some of these in the demo. Like I said before, we have a legacy street redirection field, and that is essentially copying or reading the value in our NG911 field and then populating with the domain of the legacy field. Same thing with street type. So you can have domains that help you with your initial data management. So if you're with this type, for example, if you have a domain for your type value, you can just start typing avenue, type in AV, you'll see avenue pop up, you click that, and then this rule would automatically read that avenue value and populate AVE in your legacy field. So talked over this. The last thing I wanted to mention is the parity left and right. This is useful. You can have a rule that reads the range value of your road center lines. So if you have a from value that's odd and an even value that is, or sorry, a to value that's even, it'll read that it's both odd and even and calculate that that side is both, just automatically populating that parity field. Likewise, if you have from to that are both even, it would populate with the even domain value. Just one less thing that you have to worry about, and it can also help you identify areas where, why do I have a both parity? I know that that street's not correctly both, and you can dig into the data issues that you might have there. Moving on to address points, you can see there's some repeat because we're dealing with some of the same fields. So pre-direction, types, post-directions, those are all valuable. And then the legacy street name, this is one of the more complex rules that I'll work with is legacy street names. So as many of you that are familiar with the NG911 schema recognize, there is a lot of parsing happening in NG911. We have, especially in the pre's, we have like pre-modifier, pre-type, pre-separator, all of those fields that aren't necessarily reflected in like for like in the legacy schema. So sometimes in the legacy field, you might have, well, in NG911, you might have an interstate value, but legacy-wise, you want that represented as I dash something. Likewise, you might have a different abbreviation for state highways or county roads. Those abbreviations, because they fall not within the actual street name in the NG911 field, you kind of have to write a rule that reads those other fields to then populate into your legacy street name field. So it's possible. It's just kind of, you have to make your own decision on whether or not the squeeze is worth the juice, because it does require some more configuration. Like what, as I said earlier, latitude and longitude is possible for address points with the caveat about the baseline coordinate system. Okay, so essentially we'll dig into kind of how to deploy this, but all attribute rules is an arcade expression. We're running Esri's proprietary language arcade within the attribute rule itself. And this is an example of our legacy post-direction rule, where we're just essentially reading the full name and populating it with the abbreviation. We also have the spatial lookup pattern template at the bottom there, just kind of as an aside, showing that you can do multiple things within that expression field. So let's talk about validation rules and domains. These elements of data management are very helpful whenever you're using attribute rules because you're just kind of building on top of good practice. If you have domains, I highly encourage you to use them. That just helps your data editors from, inputting a common mistake, and it just helps the repetition. If you know what the value needs to be, having a domain is very helpful. Validation rules, it really depends on your workflow and your organization, whether or not that's really worth your time. But validation rules are very, in general, very helpful. You would utilize the Esri's Error Inspector tool within ArcPro to kind of read through. It kind of populates another map with the errors that you have in your data, and you can go through and mark those as an exception or change what the underlying data however it needs to be, and then refresh. It will rerun those validations to see if that error is still present. So yeah, we have quite a few validation rules here that we typically will run. Parity error check, making sure that our parities match the ranges. Name mismatches, making sure that our predirections are spelled correctly. Incorporating municipalities, all those things. Making sure that the point is where it says it's supposed to be. Okay, so AI is all rage. So I thought I would talk to you guys a little bit about if you were to use AI to help you build attribute rules, this is how I would do it. First off, be as specific as you can with what you're asking the model to help you with. If you have an idea for an attribute rule, you say, I really wish that this field auto-populated whenever I populate this field. If you tell the AI what you're going for, and you include the names of the fields, the data values, how those values are formatted, the field type, as well as, if you need to, file paths. But typically, because we're in an arcade structure, your file paths are already kind of taken care of. The best advice I've heard as far as approaching working with AI on these sorts of problems is to describe your goal and then ask the AI to interview you on the steps that you would need to reach that goal. So if there are things that you forgot about or you don't know that are connected, that will usually kind of help. It'll start asking you questions about where this data is, what format is it in, and you can provide that additional context to get you closer to a usable output. All right, that's my little soapbox. All right, demo time. Okay, so what I'm hoping to do with this demo is to show you kind of where attributes live, show you some readily available resources that you can kind of pull from, and then I'll show you some of the functionality of some of the rules that I was describing earlier, and we'll possibly get into that. The parity mismatch was more of a validation thing. That might take some time, but I'll kind of give you a tour, 30,000-foot view. All right. Okay, so once this loads, okay. I am working off of a small monitor, which it feels very foreign to me. Hopefully you can see this. If not, I apologize, and I'll try to adjust my screen as needed. Right now I just have like a rough address point and road Centerline data set pulled up here with attribute rules applied to them. You can see in my site structure address points here, we have our legacy predirectional calculation field, our legacy street type calculation and post direction, as well as latitude, longitude. Then we have several concatenation rules to kind of just help us manage our full name, and we're also running some checks on community values between road center lines and address points. These are a bit more bespoke for the needed purpose that we were using for this data. But a lot of these, are kind of evergreen. They're useful in almost any situation. So right now I have 315 South Indiana Avenue highlighted, and we have our attribute table open over here. If I edit my street name predirectional, this is our NG911 field. So we have our domains populated with the full spelled out domain. We're going to change it from south to southwest. And whenever I apply, you can look at this legacy street pre-directional field here. When I apply that, it automatically populates to southwest. Similarly, let's make this bayou instead of avenue. And we'll have the legacy street name type automatically populate below. So it's very simple in action, but it's very helpful, as you can imagine. The other thing I was going to do is show you, let's modify. Let's go over here. We're going to create an address point. I'm just going to, okay. So this is a good example of some of the restrictions that we're having. So we have some rules that are preventing me from adding this point because it's automatically populating a null value for our country, the state, the county, and the incorporated municipality. These are those, how do I put it? This is the constraint rule that we have. It's not wanting me to add unless I have a stated value. So one of the things I would do to correct this error is to have an auto-populate for country or state. I know which region I'm working in. So having that that default domain value would eliminate a vast majority of these. Additionally, because I pulled in this data without the other data set with it, it's looking for the incorporated municipality layer, which I don't have. So instead, I'm going to just simply move my Southwest Indiana, or 315 Southwest Indiana Bayou now. Let's go over, there it is. I'm going to zoom down to my latitude and longitude values here. I'm not sure that this will make much of a difference, but I'm going to shift it over quite a bit and say OK. And we can see the latitude and longitude values changed automatically with the new location of that address point. So the other things I was going to show you, we have the road Centerline attribute rules pulled up here as well. This is in this map that I'm displaying. But I wanted to show you that I've just opened up the address data management solution from Esri. So those solutions that Esri puts out are something that I recommend you kind of just keep aware of and download every now and again. Not that you have to deploy the whole thing. Sometimes just downloading the solution, opening up the Pro project can give you some good ideas on how they have their data organized. And this is their address data management solution. I've opened up the site addresses, and we have attribute rules already populated within this solution. So you can kind of look through what Esri is, having as standard, and dig into the expression that they're using as well. Here we go. Again, small screen, I apologize. So for example, with this full address rule that we have, we can use this rule. Whenever you create a rule, you're going to have to give it a rule name, which then kind of constrains if you need to rename it. It's tough to do. It's better to kind of just create a new rule with a new name. Okay. You'll need to add a description, and let's go down a little bit further. Wow. Live demo. No safety nets. Essentially, within the attribute rule, if this ever comes back, you'll have small checkboxes on how you want that configured, and that's where you would have your trigger instances. You can have like that insert, update, delete trigger. Some of the considerations, wow. We'll just keep rolling, and I'll go back over to my presentation since the computer's fighting me on this one. Whenever you're configuring the rule, you'll have the rule name. The main thing to kind of remember is that each attribute rule is working on a particular field within your attribute table. So you'll need a rule for every field that you want the rule to act on. So if you're writing a rule for the legacy street name type, that will need to be one rule. And if you have another rule for the legacy street name direction, that's another field, so another rule. So you're really just limited to, and you have multiple attribute rules running on each field. You'll need to kind of think through the order of that you have those rules firing in. But there's no limit on the number of rules per field, but there is a limit on the number of fields per rule. With that, the main takeaways I wanted you to get out of this are calculation rules are going to be your workhorse. That's where I'd focus your attention. It's going to be really helpful for you to have discussions with your data editors, the people that are making these changes, to see like what rules, like what fields they're using, and kind of keep that in mind as we're moving towards the NG911 thing. Can we have them start editing those NG911 fields? Because it's always easier to concatenate than it is to parse. So NG911 being pretty parsed already, it's easier to kind of write rules to put things back in their place. Validation rules are very helpful for auditing your data's health in general. They can be limited, and it's more of like a data reviewer usefulness. So maybe not for your day-to-day data editors. And then domains are really valuable to help constrain your input choices. Building out domains as often as you can is very valuable. Start small. Just try something that would make your day a little bit easier. As you set one rule up, you'll learn that it's not that hard to institute an attribute rule. And you'll just keep growing on that. The AI slide, I like to mention it because it is useful, always with the caveat that it's worth testing. The good news about employing AI into this environment, this is it works or it doesn't sort of territory. So it's pretty easy to discern whether or not you're on the right track or you're not. And yeah, with that, I'll open it up to questions. Yeah.
Does this, like, as long as you have the right, like, named user roles and things like that, does this work with, like, a enterprise database feature class, or do you need a feature service?
That's great. So this is working on the underlying data that would then you publish to your feature service. You can have a branch version set up. Yeah, you would need, if you're going to edit your attribute rules, that would need to happen, and then you would publish that feature service for those rules to be used. That's a great question. With enterprise, you would need, essentially, you need the highest level of authority to make those changes.
When you have a lot of rules, calculation rules set up, do you find performance differences whether you have it automated or whether you do the batch? Do you recommend one way or the other?
Great question. In general, automatic is totally fine. There's no performance issues. The only time that we recommend doing batch is if you know that you're making a lot of changes all at once to your data set, then it's worth making those changes as necessary so that you're not doing thousands of changes all at once, and kind of setting that aside for an afternoon or a quiet time for it to run. But in general, the automatic population and the day-to-day workflow, we've experienced no issues with the slagginess or slowness of the system.
We have time for one more question.
Are these available on hosted feature services, or is it only like enterprise stuff that needs to be in a database?
Okay, that's a great question. So on hosted feature services, I would highly doubt that. I would need to dig into the Arc Online, or AGOL is constantly expanding their the use of Arcade within that software. So it's constantly changing. It might happen, but for now, this is an Arc Pro environment thing. So you can kind of set that up and then help your data editors access that data, but a lot of that would just be running kind of behind the scenes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
All right. And I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you all for coming.